Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
All right. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Rich, what's going on, man?
Yes. Good to talk. We've
Happy
already,
Saturday.
yes, happy Saturday to you. We've already chatted for about an hour or so about all sorts of things, which we're not going to talk about now, right? What we're going to talk about, well, you're going to find out what we're going to talk about because I'll
Okay.
throw something at you, right? But before I do, I was thinking about this conversation and thinking about how come you're so good, in my opinion, at your macro perspectives.
Mm,
And
right.
and and here's where I got to, right? So I know I've told you I've done a lot of work with an organization called Landmark Worldwide, and their whole
Hmm.
work is all about distinctions.
Hmm.
Distinctions are distinct. Like balance is a distinction. It's not like anything else. Being wet is a distinction. It's not like anything else. And it gives
Right.
rise to a different experience to being dry. And the two aren't comparable. And reading about balance doesn't give you a sense of balance. It's an
Right.
experiential
Right.
it's phenomenon, right? I remember when I was a teenager trying to learn from my mum how to cook great curry. She was absolutely brilliant. It was magic, magic. And I'd
Right.
say to her, "What do I do?" And she was, "Well, you got this much meat, and then I'd add this much turmeric and this much chili powder and this." And I said, "Well, how much? Half a teaspoon? 1.5 teaspoons? No, just this much." She just knew. So there were patterns that she was able to recognize, something she was able to intuit. And then I know for myself, I can walk into a home as a social worker, say with a newly qualified social worker, and they don't see anything. And I'm like,
Right.
oh my God, there is
Right.
some child abuse going on here, right? Or some of my friends, I see the videos. Some people, most people can tell Joe Biden sniffing little girls, those videos of Joe Biden. I'm like, oh my God, that is serious grooming behavior.
Right.
But many people won't see it because they can't see the patterns.
Right.
And the thing that I think that you do really, really well, and actually what I think I do, which fits
Right.
in with what you do, is I see patterns of abuse.
Hmm.
We talked about this before. I can see patterns of
Yeah.
abuse,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I can
Absolutely.
see them at different scales. And I know not to trust the word of somebody who beats their wife, or the word of somebody who abuses children,
Hmm.
right? Their word is suspect.
Yep.
So then, what I think you're great at, and I think you've said this, is seeing patterns how they play out at a macro level. And
Hmm.
that's also what makes you so good at strategic board games, which I've
Hmm.
never really played and have no
Sure.
understanding of. So I just wanted to start that. It's like that level of pattern recognition is what gives you your expertise, and it's distinct to what Alex does.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Alex has a different modality, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, and I don't know. It's funny. Like, you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier because I was, like, I love to talk about, but I never do. I talk about it a little bit here and a little bit there because I know people are like, because I'm talking about shit that no one cares about. Like part of me like really wants to reach out to some of the big board gaming podcasts that are out there and say, dude, we need to have a talk. I need to be a guest on your show. Like, do the Shut Up and Sit Down podcast out of the London guys who take a very high level artistic approach to board game reviews. It's a brilliant channel, by the way. You should actually watch their videos on YouTube. They're hilarious. And it doesn't matter if you know anything, damn thing about board games. You'll just find these things hilarious. They're two or three cheeky Londoners that do their thing. But they also have a really great um, view, and have very high standards of what makes a great game and what doesn't make a great game, and for all so many reasons. And so they take a not just intellectual approach in that respect, but they really do care so much about the art form, and they see it as an art form, not just their job. That I'd love to be able to sit down and like have discussions about structure of games, arcs, this, all this stuff. Like I can point to any one of these games back here, and I can go, what kind of game is it? We have a shorthand within the community for it, but um, they all have a structure to them in terms of how the game plays itself out. I was talking about this in this month's issue of the newsletter, and I was trying to explain it using a game that was my favorite and is now dead, unfortunately. But it was a game so good that it bombed on initial release, and then the players bought it out of receivership
Wow.
bought the rights to it, and then kept it alive, printing cards through crowdfunding through Kickstarter for 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, no, seriously. Like, so the game's called Shadowfist, and it was an old collectible card game about, and with the mix the secret war of geopolitics through time and Hong Kong action movies is the theme. So it's hilarious, right? So it's like, imagine, Jackie Chan meets hopping vampires from the 18th century, and and Chinese lotus eaters, and monks, and Shaolin monks, and cyborg monkeys, anarchists from the future, and throw it all together with magic and technology, and it's just this melange of all of these different things. And there's a great role playing game that's built around that called Feng Shui, which is literally, hey, let's take this and do it as a tabletop role playing game where you tell your own stories within this universe. Those guys, that would be Robin Laws was the designer of that, and then John Tweet. They were all part of like what I would call the Atlas Games group from the 90s. John Tweet had a brilliant simple role playing game called Over the Edge, which created this fictional place called Alamara, this island nation called Alamara, which was basically I'm gonna get a little geeky here. This is basically like a Kafka-esque nightmare of conspiracy theories and all of this stuff, right? So like the secret agents running around, and like the airport at the Alamara airport is literally described as
Okay.
is designed to be something like Kafka's castle, right? So you can imagine, but these guys were tapped into something very, very, very real,
Yes.
right? And they were like the underground voice within that community, right? That we're talking about a lot of these like weird geopolitics things that we talk about today. And now we're seeing these people come out from behind the shadows today. So back then it was like, oh, isn't that cool? Is that all the conspiracy theories were real?
Yeah.
And then let's make a board game. Let's make a tabletop game. Let's make a card game. Let's make this. Let's make that around it, right? It's cool. It's a great business model.
Tom, I'm gonna let you get any more geeky, right? Let me bring it back to what we want to talk about, right? The macro politics.
Sure.
But being able to distinguish patterns of play. What you've got are human beings that created those games based upon their knowledge and ideas of how human beings operate. And then what you do, I think, really, really well as a commentator is the strategic games
Right.
in
That
that
these people are playing.
behavior at a global scale. And
What I'm trying to, yeah,
to Britain.
go ahead.
Britain.
Yeah, we're going to talk about, yeah, the whole thing with Britain. No, here's the thing.
Yep.
What I'm setting up there is to understand that I gravitated towards this stuff. Like, understood, I ate the stuff like it was candy. This to me was like this is the fiction I wanted to write. This is the fiction that I wanted to ingest. These are the stories I wanted to tell, and this was the milieu I wanted to hang out in all the time. It's the fiction that I have up on my shelf. I'm pointing literally to Grant Morrison's The Invisibles. Those of you who are comic book fans, you know what I'm talking about. Those of you who don't, go buy the fucking thing. Like, it's not that tough, right? Like, there's a cheat code to geopolitics, and it's embedded in the 75 issues of The Invisibles that's in that book. Like, there's a lot in there, and there's a lot of stuff that when I read it, I didn't understand a word of it, and I still don't understand a word of it. I read all this Philip K. Dick when I was 15 years old. I didn't understand a word of what we was talking about. I go back and read these books now, I'm like,
Yeah.
holy Christ, I'm a completely different person, and I understand what they were talking about, and you're so you now have to do the strategic stuff, which is like the games will teach you, like, okay, move, counter move, think 3 moves ahead, do this, do that, or where's my position within this game? How am I going to get from here to the end and wind up with 1 more point than that guy? How am I going to do that? Or how am I going to take him out? And then some of it is you can't even predict that far ahead, so you have to play both tactically and strategically at the same time. You have to be in the best games, leave you in the moment, but you have paths to victory. And the one game in particular that I was trying to talk about in this month's issues is that game was called Shadowfist. And the reason that Shadowfist worked so well was because as a structure, the structure was very loose, but it allowed for maximum player interaction and gave all the players at any point in the game to respond in ways that pretty much any other game I've ever played has not been allowed. I mean, maybe other games since then have done this as well, but in a multiplayer environment, and I'm not talking about a 2-player environment. 2-player Shadowfist is garbage, but in a 5-player environment or 4-player environment, you had the ability that anybody did anything, everybody had a chance to react. either I play a little event card, which changes the board state. You can respond to that. Or I attack you, Rich, and then, but Jerry over there can intercept or help me, depending on where we are in the board state. So it allowed everybody to, I literally were training people how to manipulate everybody's perception of reality relative to their hidden information and their cards in their hands and this. And so it was like a great game of poker, right? Mixed with like what amounts to what we would call an area control game.
Right, it's a great model.
And which is what geopolitics is. Geopolitics
Yes.
always comes down to area control, right? There's area, and for those of you who don't know what the fuck I'm talking about when I use the word area control, I mean Risk. Everybody's played Risk, even if you hate it, which I do. But we've all played Risk. And Risk has a brilliant opening game, has a good opening game, has a fun mid game, and a terrible end game. It's a typical old American style board game, which is what we call Ameritrash game, where it's we have a great mid game, and then I don't know, knock everybody out and take over the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so we play this game for 2 hours, and everybody likes playing Risk for about the first hour and a half to 2 hours, and then the next 12 hours, as people slug it back and forth and throw 70 armies on the board, and they do this shit while the first two people who were knocked out of the game, are sitting there over there playing a different game or watching a movie or some other shit. It's stupid. It's a bad game design. But what's important is the basic idea of I'm going to take this territory and that's going to give me these advantages and to do this and do that. There are better games out there that model this kind of thing than Risk, and you can do so in an hour and a half, 2 hours, or whatever. But Risk is a 1950s design, so like I don't. You know what I mean? So, but just to have an idea of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Actually, there are new versions of Risk today that actually do a better job of playing Risk than Risk did, like Risk 22.
One of the things that you always say, that there are many players, many different self-interests. Meta cartels are unstable, and you've been talking recently about a split in Britain.
Yes.
And I'm living in Britain. I'm interested, and there was something you said in the Sean Newman podcast recently, the latest one you did with Alex Crane, a brilliant podcast, by the way, about Britain and Israel and the split in the relationship with Britain and Israel and Davos's role. And then you said that Biden's portraying himself. You said this some time ago. Biden's going to present himself as a peace candidate. And I saw a heading like that a few days ago in Zero Hedge. So clearly you are Biden's advisor on the quiet.
Okay. Clearly. With the amount of money these fucking people are printing, you would think that they would like write bigger checks, right? It's the old joke. I get called a Putin shill or Putin apologist. I'm like, well, tell Mr. Putin that 200,000 rubles doesn't go nearly as far as you think it does. I kid, of course. I am not on anybody's payroll other than my patrons. And Newsmax, because those are my two sources of income, right? So yeah, the situation in the UK is very interesting because it's like, look, you have to take. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. What did Henry Kissinger? I think it's Henry Kissinger said about geopolitics. There are no allies. There are only interests. Or Winston Churchill said that. There are no allies. There are only interests. Right. So when you sit down, one of the things that I don't argue the board state of geopolitics from my perspective. Right. One of the things that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of hours of gaming has taught me, in order to win the game, you have to give up all grudges. You can't go into a game like if you and I get into a conflict early in the game, right? And you beat me in the thing, I can't hold a grudge against you knocking me down a peg. I can't hold that grudge. I have to get my emotions out of it. I got to go, no, likely Rich did exactly what he needed to do because he thought he was trying to win. Now, I can lobby you to say, don't make that move because that's going to have these other attendant knock-on effects and see if I can convince you or wheedle you into not. And that's what diplomacy is. That's what we're supposed to do when we send diplomats overseas, right? So there's that part of any game like this where there's a negotiated political environment, right? And some games are better at bringing that out of people than other games are. Depends on the structure of the game. It depends on the game you're playing. So you have to be. I can't hold a grudge because I may need you as an asset to stop, Rick from winning later on. And if I hold a grudge against you and never do anything, and shut you out, then it's now my sole responsibility to deal with that guy. And now I no longer have an asset. I know now because games like this are exercises in narcissistic triangulation. You know, you get two people to, you know, agree on a thing to take out a third person now, and you constantly just go around the table, but it's all dispassionate.
Yeah.
There are no grudges. The problem that we have today is you can see it, is people like Victoria Nuland, John Bolton, Benjamin Netanyahu, and others have allowed their grudges to take over their decision-making process.
Mm-hmm.
Victoria Nuland hates Russians. Okay? She hates Russians. Davos has placed people in charge of places like Latvia and Poland, or you know, or wherever, who hate X group. Why? Because they're setting up the grudge that they can have a poll there to isolate some other person, so that they're fighting amongst themselves over here, and they refuse to come to any kind of rational agreement. How many years have I come on this podcast and said, you know, if the Poles had a brain, they'd send somebody third-class functionary from their ministry of the diplomacy, their foreign ministry, over for coffee with one of Lavrov's, you know, third-tier diplomats in a neutral site in you know, Abu Dhabi, and start having coffee about how they're going to repair Russian-Polish relations. This is the smart move by the Poles, but the Poles never make that decision, ever. Why? Well, because the people who are put in power in Poland at certain times, they want the Brits to amplify the Russophobia, or they want the Davosians to amplify the Russophobia for different reasons. That's natural within the Polish people's psyche, and with good reason. And no way, manner, shape, or form am I telling Poles not to hate Russians. You got plenty of historical reasons to hate Russians. And so understand that that's being used against you, right? So now let's shift to Britain, Israel, and everything else. It's the same thing. It's the same dynamic, right? In the following. If you posit that the United States is not a monolithic political and economic empire, that an organization as big as the American government and the American finance class and blah, blah, there's not going to be one group. It ain't one big group, and we're not in it. It's not us versus them. Anybody who reduces geopolitics to us versus them, other than in the most broad sense, the broadest sense, yes, it is us versus them, people versus the elites. But the elites have their own set of agendas. They're the ones playing the game. We're not playing the game. We're observing the game. We're the people sitting around my kitchen table with the five of us, me, Rick, my wife, Sherry, and Brian, playing Shadow Fist, and there's 10 people watching us play. We're the 10 people watching them play. I'm Klaus Schwab. Rick's the king of England. This one is that guy. You know, my wife is, you know, Ursula von der Leyen. Oh my God, I can't believe I just fucking said that. Okay, that's what's happening, folks, and you're watching it play out.
Yeah.
And what I've tried to explain to everybody is that what we're trying to do is figure out who's going to win this round, this round, this particular game. We're going to shuffle up and deal again 10 years from now. We're going to do this all over again. Okay, we're going to shuffle up and deal again 10 years after that, because this has happened before and this will happen again. Ask me why I'm rewatching all of Battlestar Galactica. Okay, because again, the whole fucking series is about narcissistic abuse, right? Okay. Between the humans and the Cylons, and the factional split within the Cylons, and it's all right there. Same thing. Stress creates friction and factionalization, but everybody wants to win. And what we're trying to do is figure out who's going to win, so that we can allocate our assets and our time to our best advantage. And the problem is that in a game this loose and with this level of shifting alliances, that prediction is very, very difficult to make. And then you have to understand. And so what I do as the observer is, if I do something better than everyone else, and I'm not, again, you guys salt all this shit to taste. If I do something better than everybody else, it's that I can assess what deck they brought to the table, what set of assets they brought to the table. Because everybody's bringing different assets to the table. Like in a game like Shadow Fist, it's like Magic the Gathering or Pokemon, or you have a collection of cards and you build a 60 card deck, and then you bring that in and you fight it out against somebody else. Just imagine that in a 5-player environment. as opposed to a two-player environment. Two-player environments, everybody understands: move, counter, move, counter, move. But now you got move, counter, 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 move. Oh shit! And you got to go all the way around. You got to survive. You got to, if you can't win this turn, you got to survive the next 4 turns before you get a chance to go again to try and win, because you can't win on somebody else's turn, right?
Yeah.
So what I do better than everybody else, I think, is assess what the assets they brought to the table are, and how those various assets interact with one another. And so when you think about Britain versus, I'm coming right back to it. So when you start thinking about it from that perspective, you have to ask yourself, okay, was this a 5-player game? Now is it a 7-player game? Is it now a 9-player game? Is it a 15-player game? Or is it reducing back to a 5? Or did it crest up to a 15-player game and now it's back to a 5-player game? Like, that's part of what I do, I think, and what I've been trying to do. And it can be very confusing for people and think that I'm like talking out my ass just to justify my analysis, but it's not. I'm literally trying as best I can to figure this stuff out. So now let's talk about Britain and Israel. Israel is a project of the old British foreign policy establishment around the Milner Group, Cecil Rhodes, the British, with the support of the British Crown and all of that. What we would call the old British Empire. Yep. Winston Churchill was, probably the pinnacle of he was the guy charged with keeping the British Empire alive by proxy. That was his job in history. And he did it very well, because we have their proxy, the United States and Israel, on the board. But by the same token, post-World War II, the old European colonialists who never really gave up power in continental Europe were rebuilt by that same group, because they were needed to combat the Russian Empire that was the Soviet Union and China. And so we couldn't leave continental Europe a wasteland. In Shadowfist terms, they got wiped off the board, and they're going to take 3 turns to rebuild, to get some sites in play and generate some power and put some dudes in play and make, they needed time to rebuild. They were going to be out of the game for 2 or 3 turns. If you've ever played the original version of Dune, same thing. You made your big push for the win, and you got wiped out, and all your dudes are in the tanks, and it'll take 3 turns for you to get enough dudes back to put them on the board to be able to be a factor in the game. This happens in a 6-hour game of Dune. You have to have the patience for it. And that's the way I see Europe. Europe today is attempting to break out of the mold created by the Marshall Plan and NATO and all that. And they were a basket case, and now they're trying now to go for the win. And how are they doing that? Again, there are no allies. They're just interests. How are they doing that? They're doing that now by trying to create a functional split between, quote unquote, what the Russian guys like to call the Anglosphere, what like Andre the Saker used to call the Anglosphere, or Pepe Escobar calls the Anglosphere, and push them to the background. They infiltrated the American government. They infiltrated the institutions of power here in the United States at the same time that the Brits did this. And at some point, when somebody becomes when the crown was ascended in power, everybody, all the second tier people lob onto the second tier players, glom onto the crown and ride their coattails. When there's another rising power, some of those people fall off and they realign themselves with somebody else. So again, it's like, I can model that in a game of Shadowfist, but with a metaphor, but nobody will get it. So just understand that's natural human behavior, right? So, the situation now is very clear that Davos, for whatever reason, and whoever helped build that situation to get out of control of the original benefactors being the United States and Britain to rebuild Europe, and I would argue that Russia and China had a hand in rebuilding Europe. Russian cheap gas was in their best interest to sell them cheap gas, the Chinese to export cheap goods in and build and we decided to make Germany into an economic powerhouse and a leader. And we made Germany into the economic powerhouse of Europe for a specific reason, which was that we knew we could control Europe if they got uppity by destroying Germany. And now we're seeing, so but that means that now let's look at what's happening in Israel, Britain, because this is where people are going to get angry with me and have gotten angry with me, because while I am no fan of Israel, their politics, their adventurism and everything else, and their, yip dog status, of running around and biting everybody's ankles and going, yeah, well, you can't touch me because big bad United States is behind me. He's Israel's the 98-pound weakling that taunts everybody on the schoolyard because they've got the 6'5" linebacker from the football team standing behind them, ready to beat everybody up if they pick on their 5'9", 98-pound weakling. So that's the way I see Israel in all of this. And they've always been and that has subsidized that kind of behavior from them. Okay. So, and everybody hates that guy. Like, even though if they can't say anything about it, right? No one likes that guy. Why would you like that guy? That guy's an asshole. Right?
Yep.
But at the same time, that guy, metaphorically speaking, represents a whole lot of people who are also victims of all of this game playing triangulation. They're also people sitting around watching the table. We have to remember, at every one of these countries, average Americans, average Britons, average Israelis, average Syrians, blah, 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 Chinese, Russians, everybody are all standing around the table with the same bated breath as to who's going to fucking win this goddamn fight that everybody else is. We have to keep that in mind, always. So Britain, Israel is really actually quite simple once you've modeled this. Davos wants control, wants to remove Israel from the scene. Why? Because they want to finally put to bed the remnants of the British Empire. That includes the British Empire's proxy, the United States. They have infiltrated, along with the Russians and the Chinese to a lesser extent, but as far as I'm concerned, I see Davos, the old colonial powers of Europe, as the primary drivers here, because psychologically they map to the most aggressive and the most entitled, because they've always controlled natural resources in the third world. They still see the U.S. as one of the colonies. But the French still want Louisiana back if you press them fucking hard enough. Okay? They still want Quebec back. They still want to make a fucking deal to get the Louisiana and whatnot back in the United States. They still want to be able to rape the Sahel region of Africa for pennies on the dollar. They still want to do this. They still want to do that. They still want to do all those things. Same thing with the Germans. Same thing with the fucking British. Same thing with the Portuguese and the Dutch and the Italians and all of them. They all want it back the way it was before. To quote Londo Mollari from Babylon 5, the Centauri ambassador, who I want it all back the way it was. And he's willing to partner with the fucking devil to get it done. Okay? I want it all back. Like the vitriol and that's what's here. So that's what they're doing. That's why all of a sudden the world is saying, hey man, it's okay to hate Israel. We're all pro-Palestine now. And the British government under Rishi Sunak everybody's like, well, that doesn't make any sense then. But why is Sunak pro-Palestinian? Because he works for fucking Davos. It's not that goddamn hard.
Yep.
Hold on.
It is hard because for those that don't see it, just like people who don't see grooming behavior, they're not able to distinguish grooming behavior. It's just being friendly. No, he's grooming.
Yes. Well, here's the thing. But Britons in particular, and Americans in particular, who followed Brexit really closely, should be able to see this behavior. Because all of the Brexit negotiations were all being sabotaged from within by the British political class headed by Theresa May, and at the time, Sir Mark Sedwell, who was in charge of the civil service. Yep. Remember? Okay, all that shit happened. And that was all. Brexit could have been negotiated in 15 freaking minutes had both sides wanted it to. Yep. Why Brexit took 3 goddamn years to negotiate was because the British were negotiating on behalf of the European Union. And we all said that at the time. And for the people, and maybe, part of my problem when I do stuff like this is I forget the fact that 3 or 4 or 5 years ago when we were doing this, you and I remember these conversations. You remember me live streaming about British Parliament and all this crap because you were there. Mm-hmm. But 90% of the people who are my patrons today or who interact with me today never heard any of that. But if you go back, folks, we did all this. Rich will attest to this. Yep. Alex Craner will attest to this. Alex Mercuris will attest to this. And I was saying all this stuff then. And so to me, when I saw Rishi Sunak installed and then there was a coup in Britain in August of 22. Queen Elizabeth dies. Liz Truss is taken out. BlackRock blackmails the Bank of England all in 1 week, and Sunak is installed. And Alex Mercouris and I, the minute they started bringing Rishi Sunak's name into the conversation, Alex and I had many a long conversation about, oh yeah, we got to watch out for Sunak. He's freaking Davos through and through.
Yep.
And so now you install him at the top of the British government. You've got Joe Biden, who's just a stand-in for Obama, and Obama advanced Davos's agenda for 8 goddamn years, along with Janet Yellen and Timothy Geithner and Ben Bernanke and all the rest of them. They were in charge, and they were using the neocons, the old British neoconservatives, and they were using them to set up the situation between Russia and Ukraine the entire time. And Russia, Syria, Israel, Syria, all of that stuff was all being set up. And they both thought that they were going to get to their preferred outcome. And they both thought they were going to win. And then the mask came off. And oh, by the way, you will own nothing and be happy. And so now the question is the following. Is Israel being sacrificed on the altar of geopolitics? And we all think it's a good idea because we've all had the button installed to hate Israel because they've been such assholes for the last 70 years. And it's a fair question. Mm-hmm. It's not to absolve them of their behavior, the government's behavior. It's not to absolve anybody of what's gone on. But understand, there are no allies. There is no room for grudges. Grudges are what you prosecute after the game is over. And this is when everybody has to sit down and do their own version of therapy to deal with this problem. Like, I don't care about anything other than making sure that none of these fucking assholes win. I want a de minimis game where none of these assholes win. That's my preferred outcome. Okay. But in the short term, I'll be on the side of the Federal Reserve, who's a player at the table, the U.S. banking cartel. I may have to be on their side for a little while because I know that they have the tools, because they got the cards in their hand and the sites in play and the characters in play, that they can deal with Davos on the other side of the table.
Yep.
Because he and I because the Fed players, because I'm looking at the Fed player's hand and I'm like, oh, he's going to read this, he's got this. Oh yeah, he can handle that.
Yep.
That's the way I see it. Like, I can, and I'm like naming cards off of them. Like, he's got these things. Oh yeah, he's got the hand to deal with those guys, because those guys are playing that or have those assets. These assets counter those assets. Blah. He's gonna. Yeah, that's fine. For example, if they try to take Ukraine from the Russian player, he's going to step in with this guy and intercept that attack, and then, ass rape him in the process and leave him with nothing left.
Yes, well,
that's what's happened.
You've got skill in distinguishing what's at play. Like my mum looking at a pot of curry cooking. Oh, it needs a bit more garam masala. How can you tell? She just knows. She just knows.
My wife is exactly the same way when cooking. She's amazing. Yeah. People ask her for the recipes all the time. She's like, recipes? I just throw shit in a pot.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
I have a recipe. So Camille, my wife was like, I have a recipe for the cheesecake. Well, that's a standard recipe. Everything else, well,
just throw something in. That's right. And then the challenge for those that don't have that skill or don't see it that way is to be willing to consider what you're saying. Because one of the things that I keep getting from people, right, is the idea that there's one monolithic oligarchy, global oligarchy, well, in the West against the East. And some people will even say, no, Putin's in on the game as well, right?
Oh, I know.
But that's not human behavior.
That's a complete code. That's complete cope when I see shit like that. It's that is either prima facie evidence of two things. One, a person who cannot distinguish nuance and needs to reject everything. They're like, the example I used to give on that one is Gary North used to say, there are people out there who think that the Fed are a bunch of closet Austrian economists, and that they're manipulating Austrian business cycle theory to manipulate everything, right? And he's like, no, they're just Keynesians and they're incompetent.
Yeah.
Stop it. You've gone too far down the rabbit hole trying to explain with a linear narrative all of their behavior that comports it, because you're thinking, if this, then this, if this, then that, and you're doing what's called a purity spiral based on a logic trail where you made an assumption at some point that was faulty, but you're now running that all the way out logically with true. Remember, in logic, if you have six decisions that are all predicated on each other. If this is true, then that is true, then this is true, then that is true. If any one of those is false, the whole chain is false.
Yeah.
Okay. You have to remember that. Logic is unforgiving in that respect. And what happens is at some point, your personal bias or your personal thing becomes to you a boundary condition of a problem. Now I'm speaking like a physics professor. Here are the boundary conditions of the problem. Let X equal this, let Y equal that, solve for force, right? And then do the thing and then explain the model of the universe. You've created a model of the way things work based on faulty boundary conditions. And you've run logically and convincingly this thing in your head and come to this conclusion. Unfortunately, your boundary conditions, your base assumptions are wrong. And because of that, your whole logic tree is wrong. While you ran it where you get points for being logically consistent, but you still get a 0 because one of your boundary conditions was wrong.
Yeah.
And that is incredibly important.
Yes. And then where I can see what's made a difference to me, because I don't see it, but I'm willing to consider it and see how it plays out. Let me check this out, right? So then what you're saying, and I think you said this to me before in video, that so then Europe gets to capture Britain, and then because Starmer is even more WEF than Sunak, and they're not going to have any liberty-loving rump of Tory MPs to get in the way and make things difficult. Right. All of Parliament will be captured by the WEF in that instance, right? Then Europe gets access to the pound, which they can sell in order to shore up the euro, and they get access to Britain's hydrocarbons.
Well, yes, you get that. Well, what you've really been seeing has been the entire City of London apparatus buying U.S. treasuries like crazy in order to prop up the long end of the U.S. yield curve, right? Meaning suppress rates and hold up prices. And the Bank of England has done this, and all of the Bank of England's proxies, by the way. Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, the Caymans, all the offshore tax havens that are under, that are nominally under British Crown control. They've been buying the crap out of U.S. treasuries. So everybody sees the headlines that China's selling all their debt and the dollar's going to die. Yeah, but the Bank of England has bought like $600 billion. They're like the fourth highest holder of U.S. debt at this point, like $900 billion total within that system, up from like $350 billion. So this is how much of other people's money they have spent to suppress the price, to do yield curve control on the U.S. yield curve in order to keep the German yield curve from exploding to the upside and collapsing all the European banks.
Yeah. So Britain has been captured.
It's a game of extend and pretend, folks. You've heard that phrase before. If you've ever read Zero Hedge, they love to use the word extend and pretend. The EU is incredibly good at that's their whole modus operandi. Extend and pretend in one arena in order to then create plots and counterplots and subplots in another arena. So financial extend and pretend in order to politically advance some other agenda and do an attack in another idiom. The U.S. legal system, for example, the U.S. political system, for example. Why we go after Donald Trump with non-crimes and all of this stuff? Not because Trump isn't whatever you think of Trump is irrelevant. What's important here is that the fallout from this case is to destroy the concept that the United States is anything other than a mafia narco state, and that there's no rule of law left. And then, oh my God, if the U.S. were to seize the Russian foreign exchange reserves, then your money's not safe there either. Now, who does shit like this? Why would the United States do this? And don't give me the spinal response that you've been programmed and fucking triggered into you. Oh, that the U.S. is just trying to protect its empire. Bullshit. That is not what's going on. This is foreign interference in our fucking system. Period.
Yep.
Choose who the foreigners are. I happen to choose Europe. Why? Because they're the ones that the most to fucking lose. The Chinese aren't doing this because they have so much to friggin' lose. The Chinese all have to do is sit back and internationalize the yuan and buy gold and make friends across Asia. Same thing with the Russians. They don't have to do anything. Well, in the Russians' case, they just have to keep lobbing artillery at the Ukrainians and strategically taking out concentrations of NATO guys that wander across the border to run the ATACMS systems and everything else that we put in place, which is all real. That's it, folks. everything. That's all the Russians have to do. They have to do nothing and win. The Chinese have no real need to destabilize the U.S. that way. The Chinese would be better served not to do this, because then you don't want the United States to collapse as a consumer economy, as a productive economy, as an innovation economy. You don't want that. It's not a zero-sum game. Like this, the real game of geopolitics is that, and this is why gaming as a thing is a bad model. It's because the game never ends. It's not a game that ends. These people all think it ends. It's like, go back and watch The Watchmen again. When Ozymandias turns to Dr. Manhattan and says, in the end, I did the right thing, didn't I, John? And he's like, nothing ever ends, Adrian. Like, the world just keeps going on. And these systems, and there is no one singular linear narrative. The point back to circle all the way back around to what you said about the people who have a hard time understanding what I'm saying is because they need, again, like I said, it's prima facie evidence of the need for a singular narrative, because they cannot deal with the idea that it's just a bunch of people doing shit, or it's foreign, or it's factionalization. Or it's just multiple competing factions doing their thing, and at the end there's a bunch of cards on the table and somebody went, got 5 sites, I win. Well, shuffle up and deal, let's do it again. Like, you know what I mean? Like, understand that, you know, again, and then I bring up Ian McGilchrist, right? Left brain versus right brain, and what he's talking about now in his book, the book tour he's doing for The Matter with Things, where it really just comes down to the model is not the world. Models are good, they're helpful, and they're useful, but the map is not the world. The map is one potential representation of what the world actually is. And oh, by the way, looking at that map, which is the fundamental fatal conceit of all the Mackinderist arguments about the heartland and Asia and all that, the geographical pivot of history. That problem with that fundamental fatal boundary conditional flaw in that reasoning is that map is not the world. The world is far more complex than that.
Yeah.
And you can't model that. So models are useful, but they have their limits. Yeah. It's like the boundary conditions of, you know, again, if you've ever taken a first semester physics class, you'll realize that it's taught as a series of thought experiments. We set up some boundary conditions to derive an equation, all the foundational fundamental equations of what effectively are Newtonian physics. But understand that Newtonian physics is a gross representation of what actually happens at the level in which matter actually interacts with each other, and these electrical and magnetic fields and all this stuff interact with each other. And then you have to start getting into quantum mechanics, which has a completely different set of rules, right? I've always said this is like, it's the difference between quantum mechanics and thermodynamics. Quantum mechanics deals with the specific interactions of electrons and with each other and their state changes and all that stuff. And then there's thermodynamics, which is like, hey, let's take hundreds of billions of electrons and atoms and get a statistically averaged result that to a lesser one, to some percentage is accurate, and accurate enough for us to build bridges and play baseball and cook hot dogs and have sex with our wives.
Yes. Okay. All right, then bringing it back.
When you see the world that way, like, this is why there's that whole, again, this is Tom Luongo's, you know, like, geopolitical unified field theory, right?
If you tug on a string, the whole thing falls apart as well. Now, we got the European elections June the 7th. One of the things it seems to me, we got the British election on July the 4th. Mm-hmm. And a point Alexander Mercouris made on the drone, which I think makes incredible sense, is that they called the election early because of the rise of all these independents. The workers, Galloway's Workers' Party, David Curtin's Heritage Party, yes. Reform.
Patrick Leahy in Ireland, who we spoke to a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, and I don't think Reform are that alternative. I have concerns about them. Richard Tice.
No, of course you should.
Yeah, talking about having smart IDs in order to deal with immigration. It sounds like a very Blairite WEF idea.
It just sounds like I agreed.
So then they want to get in, change the government before these independents have power. And then what I think is likely to happen if a Starmer government comes in, we want to see how that's going to shape up. We just got to look at what's happening in Ireland. So we can look forward to mass immigration, more spending, more authoritarianism, WF on steroids. and I think it'll have a low turnout, the election, and I think there'll be a lot more dissent. There'll be way, way more protests against Starmer's WF.
So,
Starmer's Labour Party.
so
It's already
Alex's
breaking apart.
Yeah. Okay. So Alex's observation that they called the election early is an excellent one, and as always, Alex is on top of things in that respect, because again, it's similar to because Alex can see the patterns the same way I do in this respect, which is that they always do this when they see opposition rising to the rule, they immediately try and cut it off as it starts to grow. Right. They want to cut it off down here before it starts to get up the exponential growth curve. Because once people start talking amongst themselves and the energy starts to, you start to climb that energy ladder. If you can cut it off before you get the activation energy to start the reaction, you can extend and pretend another year, another 2 years, another whatever. So that's again, and for me, the seminal moment for me that I always go back to, just as an example, is go back to 2017 when Lega in Italy was rising in the polls. And Mattarella, the good Davosian that he is, called elections 3 months early. He could have called for elections anytime between November and March of that year. Lega was rising in the polls, and he called for elections in December in order to keep Lega from getting into the 20s. So once Lega passed 10% in national polling, he called for an election. By the time the election happened, they were 13%. When the election happened, they scored 17% of the vote. Had that gone on another month, they would have gotten 21 or 22% of the vote, and they would have changed the dynamic completely between them and the coalition government that would form between them and M5S, the Five Star Movement, which would have changed the Italian Senate, which would have changed the complexion of those things in such a way that they would not have control over it anymore. They would have to work much harder, keeping Salvini as the junior partner in that, the extreme junior partner in that relationship, made him easy to take out. And that's what they did. And now Salvini is completely worthless. And you could always argue that Salvini wasn't real in the first place, but I think that's a retcon. I don't think that was real. I think Salvini was real, and then he was gotten to, and now he's done. Okay, same thing with Marine Le Pen. I think in France, same thing. The French system is different, but the mechanisms of control are exactly the same. They tried it with Viktor Orban in Hungary and failed miserably. Good on all you Hungarians who didn't fall for the psyop, right? And they're trying the same thing in Germany because they can't have AfD get control of any state electorates in the German upper house, right? And so they're doing the same thing here in Britain. You have oppositional parties that are beginning to form because you've got low barrier to entry in Britain, in the United Kingdom, for making a new political party. You guys can just make one. Like Nigel Farage made a new political party on a Friday. By Monday, they were polling 6%. We can't do that in the United States.
Yeah.
Our system is designed, thanks to the British, by the way. Our system is designed with the Byzantine set of ballot access laws that make it nearly impossible for another party to come out of the system. Then you take it even one step further, and then you start looking at the math of majoritarian systems and the prisoner's dilemma of a majoritarian first past the post voting system. And what do you have? You have these systems are all predictable what the outcomes will be. There will always be two parties in Britain for all intents and purposes. There will always be two parties in the United States. The best thing you can do is collapse one of the two major parties, take the remnants of that and make a new party, i.e. the Whigs in the 1840s and 1850s, collapsing and becoming the GOP, known today as the Republicans, in order to then and then what did they wind up with? They collapsed the Whigs, which were the main opposition to potential civil war, and then created the GOP to prosecute, a civil war. Whether Lincoln was an immune system response, right? Political immune system response or not is up to you. You could now. This is where Lincoln is a historical figure. As I get older, my view of all of this becomes more nuanced the more I understand how all of the factors surrounding the U.S. Civil War, what we call the recent unpleasantness down here in the South, like those nuances make for a very interesting conversation. And from one perspective, the South was right. From another perspective, the South were the unwitting, useful idiots of British and French, European colonial forces, blah, blah, blah. And it all depends on your point of view.
Yep.
Right. And so it's, again, none of this is, if you just want to no, fuck it, Israel's wrong and the Palestinians are victims and the Israelis aren't victims. Really, the Israeli people aren't victims. Like, how are you going to tell me that when they have the highest friggin' vaccination rate of any country in the world?
I'm with you on that one, and I was saying that to my family and friends. It's like the Israeli government doesn't care about the Israeli people. They poisoned them. They wouldn't let them go into supermarkets unless they'd had this poison inside them. That's not a
Mhm.
government that cares. That's a the Netanyahu's government was doing the job that Mengele wasn't able to do. They did it on a much larger scale. They don't care about
And by the way, they went through like 2 or 3 different governments there. So Bennett was no better than friggin' Netanyahu.
no, no, they don't care.
So then you got to ask yourself that question, like, what is that all about?
But
So I mean, have we already had the pogrom of all pogroms against the Jews because they're all going to die from the friggin' vaccine?
yeah,
That's a fair question that everybody should be asking themselves
yeah, yeah,
because, there are, oh, by the way, different tribes of Jews, right? And again, we're not supposed to be able to have these conversations because if we have these conversations, then, oh my God, people might learn something about history and the real nature of the game might be revealed to the public. We have to be, and we're supposed to be very careful about what we talk about. Like I'm at the point now. I'm in the middle. I don't give a shit. Everybody's guilty. Everybody's a victim. Everybody's, everybody's. It all sucks, and we're watching the game as the Giants run around stamping at each other. And we have 2 models. We're all observing the big game of Shadow Fist around my kitchen table, or Giants are fighting, and we're the ants trying to have to get stepped on.
yep,
Choose your model.
yep.
They're both correct, by the way.
Yes, and they don't give a fuck about us, the giants and the elites, whether
They
it's
don't.
the British elites or the Israeli elites or the Irish elites, they don't give a fuck about us. So
No.
we have to do what we can to take care of ourselves and of each other because they ain't going to.
So, and so to just remind everybody, I've given you Davos's plan for Israel. And of course, what's the old British aristocracy's plan, the Anglosphere's plan, which is to hold on to Israel because they still believe in the Mackinder control of trade route, of maritime trade routes, keep the Russians and the Chinese from integrating Asia, creating a trade bridge to Africa to be able to get the natural resources out of Africa, and build Africa like this. They don't want any of that because they want to control all of this. They want control over all the Russian natural resources, all the resources in Afghanistan and Pakistan and all the other Soviet stands, and East and Western China and all of that stuff, as well as the Sahel region of the Central Africa, for lack of a better term, all the oil and gas, all the coal, all the this, all the cobalt and the lithium and the this and the that. All they just want it all, and they want it for 1 cent on the dollar.
Yep.
And they're not. And by the way, they're not willing to pay 2.
The British are the
That's what you have to get through your fucking heads. They aren't you.
Yep.
You would be like, oh fuck, I can't get it for a penny. Fine, I'll take 10. I'll pay 10 cents. They won't. They believe they are entitled to the assets of the world for less than a penny on the dollar. Period. And until you get that through your fucking head, you will think I am insane.
Yep. And they are the people.
You choose.
They are the people that killed 20 million Indians, 2 million Irish, millions of Native Americans. They think nothing of us. They're doing it right now, killing
millions of Jews under Hitler, millions of Jews under Stalin, a million Armenians, blah, blah, blah,
Ukrainians.
blah, blah, blah. Because every one of those bouts of violence came about as a consequence of pressure they put on. Like, for example, like the Armenian genocide, you probably, I'm maybe LARPing here, maybe like making I mean, there may be some Armenians in the audience or some Turks in the audience that be angry with me for even suggesting this. But if you go with Richard Poe's argument that one of the reasons why the British pursued World War I the way they did was to destroy both the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire at the same time. If so, then the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire, or the pressure that the Ottoman Empire was undergoing during this time, led to the spasms of violence that we saw across those regions. I'm not. Maybe I have my dates wrong or whatever, but it may be a bad example, but it's the basic. But the basic concept is the same. That when you put pressure on a population, you're going to get unpredictable behavior, and when you push it far enough, there's going to be violence, and it's going to be violence that will be misdirected against those and this is part of what I've been arguing in the United States. We cannot be allowed to be gaslit by these morons into believing that it's the Antifa guys and that it's just the bad guys in Congress and it's just the lefties. No, it's not. It's fucking Europe. It's fucking Klaus Schwab. It's Ursula von der fucking crazy. It's all of these motherfuckers that need to be fucking killed. and blamed for what's been done. You're a victim of their perfidy, not. And these other people are lieutenants. Yeah, they're guilty of whatever it is they're guilty of, but they're victims too.
Yep.
And that's the shit sandwich we all have to take a bite out of and make our peace with. Otherwise, we become the Fremen and we go on a freaking bloody crusade and kill everyone. And is that what everybody wants?
No.
No. So there comes a point where you have to, it's not forgive. Because this is another part of the psychology of this process. Well, you're asking me to forgive Israel's crimes? No, I'm not. But by the same token, are they a crime that you are supposed to, you have to respond to? Or were you gaslit into believing that we have an obligation as a species to right every wrong that's ever been done to any person on the planet? And we should go on a holy fucking crusade with all of our money, time, energy, and effort to stop everyone, to intervene in every one of these things. Or we could do what Rich does on a daily basis, which is go in and try and fix one family's problems at a time. Because I got news for you. That is more valuable. Oops, point the other way, that way. That is more valuable than all the shit that we're talking about right here. I'm dead serious when I say that. Because you fix your garden. Clean your room, to quote Jordan Peterson. We don't have control. We barely have control of our own perceptions of reality, decision-making processes, and everything else. Why do we feel the need to have a comment about any of this? Ask yourself why that is. And then maybe, just maybe, you'll start to answer the question of, you'll start to break the cycle of violence and the cycle of abuse, because then you'll see the grooming and all that behavior writ large and go, you know what, I'm not playing that game anymore. Yeah. My kid's got her graduation next week. I'm going to the ball game. I'm doing this. And oh, by the way, yeah, I skipped on my taxes this year. Come grab me. Come get me. Mo latte.
Well, actually, Tom, we're going to finish up, and that's very, very good, because I'm glad you said that, because I do want to reference that, we got to fix our garden and fix our room and take care of our lives, right? But that includes working in partnership with others, building local decentralized network, taking care of each other, resisting, saying no, being ungovernable. And if you're in a jurisdiction where your country has signed up to any of the conventions on financing terrorism or genocide, then legally withholding tax, so they're not using your tax dollars, our tax dollars, to bring about the Great Reset, to destroy the food supply, to kill people in Ukraine and Yemen and Gaza and wherever.
What's really important is to understand that we may not be able to solve any of these problems. The best we can do is describe them, describe the parameters of them, do the understanding of what's happening. It doesn't matter whether I'm completely right about my model of how this is working, or Rich's model is working, or your particular model is the correct one. If we're arguing about that, then they're winning.
Yeah.
They're winning. You're falling into their false thesis, antithesis, synthesis, Hobbesian fucking two-step bullshit that they always pull. Or actually, sorry, it's not Hobbes, it's the other guy, Strauss, the Straussian two-step. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Then there's the Hobbesian two-step of A, B, and because of this, we need Superman to be the state to be in charge and to keep everybody under control. And that's why we need a kinder, more gentler European USSR.
Yep. Yep.
Like, fuck you. How about no?
Yes. Right? How about no? Bit.ly make war history, which is if you want to find out about how to legally not pay tax. And I'll have the links to Tom's Go Goats and Guns, and also his Twitter, where he misbehaves on a regular daily basis.
Let's misbehave, folks. That's another one. So after the Libertarian Party destroyed the phrase "become ungovernable" by being a bunch of douchebags this week, I'll have to start with "let's misbehave."
Let's misbehave. That's right.
I think we'll go back to "let's misbehave," and then we get to listen to Cole Porter while we're at it, because that's never a bad thing. We get to invoke Cole Porter and go listen to some great freaking music from the 30s.
Tom, thank you so much. Really great talking to you. See you again in a couple of weeks with you, me, and Alex. And fingers crossed, Alex Christoforou is going to be joining us as well.
That would be great. As a matter of fact, I really need to reach out to both Alex and Alex to see if I can get them on my personal podcast. It's just like everything. I know how busy they are. I never think to ask them if they have any time. So I almost don't want to intrude as they continue to try and do the best work that they can. So,
Great. Thank you, Tom. Comment, subscribe, like, share this. All the best. Stay free. Bye-bye.